Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Homeowners throughout the United States know all too well the devastation that flooding can bring. Rising tides, storm surges, and unpredictable weather patterns have left many communities searching for solutions beyond sandbags and wishful thinking. But what if you could quite literally lift your home, or even an entire structure, out of harm's way? Today on Take It to the Board, we're diving into the innovative world of structural elevation with Wayne Fairley, who is the managing director and one of the founders of Planet 3 or P3 Elevation. His company is transforming flood mitigation by raising homes and buildings to protect them from costly and catastrophic water damage. It's not just about lifting structures, it's about elevating resilience, property values, and peace of mind. I didn't even know this kind of elevation service was possible until I read a recent article in the New York Times in which P3 was mentioned. It really piqued my interest to find out how the process works, what are the benefits and challenges, and is this the future of flood protection for coastal and other flood-prone communities? Well, today we're going to find out. Wayne, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you, Donna. It's really good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, we're in our fourth season, Wayne, and we've never done an episode on this type of service. As I said in the introduction, I didn't even know this was possible, although when you think about it, it should be. So let me ask you, what inspired you to get into this business?
Well, like you, I knew nothing about this. And 10-ish years ago, a couple of guys came to me, one of whom is my brother. I knew my brother was working in this industry. Obviously, I know him well, but I didn't really understand it. He and the other guy, the three of us being founders of P3, they said to me, we're the best in the world at what we do, but the environment in which we do it is very complex, and we don't want to have anything to do with that environment. We just want to do the work. Would you start a company and let us work for you? And we will we'll have a home, so to speak, to do this. We're tired of being kind of nomads in the industry, working for a lot of other people.
At that point, their business was elevation, was elevating structures. And what did they start out? How small did they start out?
Well, one of my associates, one of the co-founders, Chad, he comes from a family in Michigan that they call them shack draggers. They move houses. Of course, those are small or those are frame houses that are not concrete slab houses like we have here along the southern U.S., right? So he had been in the home moving business and house lifting business literally all of his life, I think third generation in the business. But he and his father had teamed with FEMA and LSU about going on 30 years ago now to prove that slab homes could be elevated. So they did a pilot in Denham Springs, Louisiana, almost 25 years ago, proved that slabs could be lifted. And since then, Chad trained most of the people in the country that know how to lift a slab home.
So you've been around long enough now to know that this works, right? This technology works.
Yeah, undoubtedly it works. We've as P3, since the three of us founded this, we've done many hundreds of homes, 90% of which are heavy slab structures.
Well, I want to talk to you about this because, again, like I said in the introduction, I saw video. I saw that you dig trenches and you lift it, and unfortunately, we're not capturing video on this, but we can put a link to your video.
That would be great.
Because they really need to see how this works. But can you walk us through the elevation process? Let's take a 2,500 square foot home. Okay.
Good.
Let's say it's already flooded once. They come to P3, they say, Wayne, we don't want this to happen again. Can you walk us through the process, beginning to end?
Yes. So there are a couple of options on how you go about this, but I'm going to speak about a 2,500 square foot home that has been remodeled, mitigated and remodeled, right? So it is a finished product. So since it's been remodeled recently because of a flood, it's a nice place. They've really used the latest designs. Everything, it's a nice place. So we want to take great care with that. So in one sense, I say we move wedding cakes, right? You don't want to break a wedding cake, the last thing you want to do. So a wedding cake is always built on a sheet, on a platform of some sort, right? So what we do is lift the wedding cake. We don't try to lift the wedding cake individually in pieces. We lift whatever the wedding cake is sitting on, and we lift that up and support it at whatever level. is appropriate for that home. And I can speak about how high do we lift. That's always a discussion, and there are several parameters for that. But we would tunnel under the home and literally dig under that 2,500 square feet home about 100 to 150 linear feet of tunnels. And
I know I apologize in advance. I'm going to stop you a lot because you're talking to a lawyer, somebody who doesn't know anything about. First of all, what kind of machinery do you use to tunnel, and how far down do you know to tunnel?
Well, the answer may be surprising in that we use no machinery whatsoever for the tunneling. We have teams of men whose job is to tunnel, and they love to tunnel. And the artistry of their tunnels show their pride in doing their job, doing their work. And so they literally do it all by hand.
Okay, I gotta let that sink in. So you have so for a 2,500 square foot home, what size team would you need? Because tunneling is the start. First, you have to get.
Tunneling is the start, yes.
Okay, so how many people would you?
We go to the house, we make sure everything is out of the way, so to speak. We start tunneling. So there would typically be a team of 10 excavators, 10 guys, for about 7 to 10 working days. And the main thing they're doing is tunneling. A home, most slab homes, if they're built properly, there's the top of the floor is flat of the slab, right? But on the bottom, it's got ridges. I say that the top of the slab is a pancake, the bottom of the slab is a waffle.
Okay.
Okay. So what we actually lift is the waffle. We find the thick parts of the slab. They're called grade beams. And so in the tunneling process, we identify these grade beams because we actually lift the platform using the ridges in the waffle, right? And so we do that tunneling, and then after we've identified all of those, we start building the foundation. And the foundation is built out of concrete blocks that are about the size of my large laptop screen here, square and solid, and they have a hole in them. So we literally put those in the tunnels under the waffle section. Tell me if I'm getting too much detail here. But
keep going.
One hydraulic jack that goes out to a machine that's pressurizing the hose and pressurizing the jack, and there's two people doing it, and they're using verbal signals to each other. And the guy in the trench is literally lining the block up and pushing that block into the dirt. And then we'll reset the jack up to 50 times to push additional blocks on top of that one deep into the earth. And between each block, there's a steel pin that locks those two blocks together. And the secret sauce is that we push that block until the pressure against the block is so great that instead of the block going down, the house starts to move up. So a key part of the quality control is to make sure you have someone there that recognizes when that moment of refusal, it's called, when that moment of refusal occurs, so that you don't break the blocks or you don't break the house.
Okay, that's a lot. So 2,500 square foot home, let's say 10 days to dig the tunnels.
Yes.
At what point typically, and I know everything's different, and I want to talk to you about the different type of slabs that you might encounter in the different procedures.
Yes.
But let's say it's a slab in good condition. At what point do you hit that refusal after the tunnels and everything's in place?
It depends on the soil. So the block, the pile is installed to a certain pressure, and it depends on the nature of the soil into which the block is being pushed. And in Florida, where you have sand, it's difficult to use this method. We don't use this method in coastal and beach environments because you can't push that block into sand.
Right. So, I was going to ask you, so what method do you use for homes built on the sand?
We do the same tunneling, but we tunnel in order to insert beams under the home. So we lift the beam. We don't lift on the pile. We lift on a beam by pushing up on steel beams.
So does the age of the structure matter, Wayne, in terms of whether or not the underlying slab has deteriorated, especially because concrete and again, I'm not a contractor, I'm not an engineer, but I'm an attorney who deals with a lot of condos and homeowners associations. It's my understanding that concrete has gotten more porous in nature, and it gets more porous over time. So can you talk about the age and condition of the slab?
I am not either a concrete expert. I know that concrete strength, concrete, the chemical reaction that creates concrete from the water evaporation, it gets stronger quickly. In 7 days, it gets to most of its strength. And then I understand it keeps strengthening for up to 10 years. And then after that, there's a slow decline in the quality of the concrete, right? But it can last for hundreds of years.
So what I'm hearing, is there any structure that's too old for this method? Like, have you done any historic homes or buildings?
Yes. So most of the homes that we elevate, I would say, were built in the 60s or 50s, many in the 70s and since. But concrete didn't come into use as widely as it is until about the 50s, right? So if you think of the mid-century moderns, the ones you might see Cary Grant or somebody, having a party in, those that's when concrete came to be widely used in home construction as a slab home. Everything before that was pretty much categorically called pier and beam, right? So we left a lot of 50s, 60s, and 70s homes of very large footprint size, right? Those tend to be the houses with the bigger footprints. We left homes that are less than a year old that are very large also, because somebody messed up and didn't get it built correctly, right? Or at the correct height for, I can tell you why we would do a brand new house, but we do that too. As a practical matter, the age doesn't matter. It's the condition.
It does. Okay, but pier and beam is wood, right? So if you were talking about a house built in the 20s, the 1920s, or the 1880s, could you elevate that kind of structure, Wayne?
Yes, absolutely. And my reference point for that is the city of Galveston. At that time, 1900, there was a hurricane that hit Galveston. Nobody knew it was coming, right? No, it wasn't around then. And Galveston was bigger than Houston. After that flood, the entire city of Galveston was elevated. Every house there was pier and beam, and they elevated almost every house there by about 5 feet. Pier and beam homes are much easier to do than slab houses.
Wow. You've led me into my next question. Is there a minimum? Somebody calls you out. Do you say, we have to raise it at least this much, and we can only raise the structure this high? Is there a minimum and a maximum for elevation?
There's not a minimum per se. There is a practical minimum because it's difficult to work under a house that's only been lifted, a few inches or 1 foot, right? It's difficult to do the follow-up things that we need to do, like rebuild or restore the plumbing underneath the home. It's easier if you got a crawl space of 2 or 3 feet, right? So the sweet spot for our business is about 5 feet. We elevate many homes in the 4 to 5.5 foot range, because that's a very economical point, and it solves for 80% of our customers, it solves their issue. We can lift, the highest that we've ever lifted is 18 feet, but there is no practical limitation. We've lifted many homes 10 feet also. And the thinking being that if you lift a home 5 feet, you can't use the space underneath for anything except maybe storing a kayak. You can't walk around under it practically. If you lift a home 10 feet, you've got an area the size of the entire house underneath that's usable for parking or storage, any number of things. So 7 feet is kind of a no man's land. It's not high enough to be functional, but yet it's pretty high, right?
Yeah, I imagine you also have to contend with local zoning ordinances. So I wanted to ask you, are local ordinances catching up with this technology and the growing demand for elevation? Because we continue to flood. And I want to talk to you and ask you how many homes you've seen, your customers who have come to you who have flooded multiple times before they made the decision to elevate. So 2-part question. One is, are local ordinances catching up because of the recurrence of flooding in many areas? And are you seeing a lot of customers who were flooded more than once, and that's why they came to you?
Yes, I'll take the second one
Mm-hmm.
first, right? So here in Houston, we have an area called Meyerland that was built out in the 60s. A very nice, it's close to the Texas Medical Center. There are a lot of well-to-do families that live there. And about half the population is Jewish. The synagogues are there. Everybody that lives there wants to stay there. But yet they flooded in 2015 and 2016 and 2017. Imagine remodeling your house 3 times in 3 years.
No, Wayne, I cannot
insane.
imagine it.
No, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But after the second and third floods, they called us, and we lifted a lot of houses in that. You have the intersection there of people with means and repetitive flooding and nice homes and a desire to stay there. That is an outlier community where you have all those factors in one place. But yes, many people call us after one flood, definitely after 2 or 3.
And what about the local ordinances? Because you said that the highest elevation you've ever attained was, I think, 18 feet.
Yes.
I imagine that, was that okay? Or did you have to get a variance under the local code?
So if you can imagine, we lift homes in various kinds of communities. Think of a subdivision, right? We have these sprawling subdivisions. And then in other places, you have a river in a valley setting that is more casual, right? And so that along those settings, and in fact, I'm picturing the Guadalupe River here in Texas, where once a decade, a wall of water comes down that valley as a torrent, right? And so those homes need to be lifted quite high. And that's where the super high lifts happen, the 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 foot elevations happen. Not in a subdivision where your neighbor is way down there and you're like a water tower.
You know, this podcast is called Take It to the Board.
Yes.
Right. So we deal with a lot of board issues. So yeah. I'm imagining, because you said not everything's homogenous. You mentioned a relatively homogenous community, but I'm thinking of one of my large HOAs, and maybe you have one individual, one home, one family that has said, we've had enough. We're gonna elevate this house, and we'll get into costs, but I imagine they're significant to lift a 2,500 or 3,500 square foot home, but their neighbors don't feel the same way. They may have suffered through flooding. They may not have the same means. So now you've got one home where they were equal, and maybe it changes the neighbor's view. It maybe cast a shadow. So those are the kind of issues I'm thinking about that you could encounter. And have you encountered that?
Yes, we have. So there are a lot of issues wrapped up into that, right? So I would say that typically we don't create outliers in a community. We lift homes in a community, and the others might not be lifted, but they all want to be, and they all. If you go back to Meyerland, we lifted a lot of houses there. Today, 10 years after those floods, 80% of the homes there have either been torn down and rebuilt at a higher level, or they've been elevated, or they're vacant lots. Because after 3 floods, no one's going to just keep remodeling their house, right? Or they're not worth it. They've been abandoned. There's a few of those scattered in that very nice neighborhood. So I would say that elevation is kind of the first mover those are the first movers in a community. Everybody else is going to follow by eventually elevating their house or needing to rebuild an elevated house.
That was my suspicion as well, that it's like the first domino, right? And then the rest fall because you see your neighbor is not suffering the same amount of damage. I live in a homeowners association in Western Broward County. We are slightly elevated, but in South Florida, I mean, we're at sea level. So we don't have anywhere to go, really. But there is one home in my neighborhood, and I think there's 98 homes in my neighborhood, that is on a hill. I don't know. These were all custom homes, so I don't know if that individual just had foresight 30 years ago to say, I want to, have an elevated home. But, they drive up a hill, a slight hill, but it's still a hill for Florida to get to their home.
Yes. And so there's the appearance in a neighborhood, and an elevated home being an outlier in appearance, right? But there's also a misconception that that elevated home is going to cause other homes to flood by displacing water, when in fact that's not true, because every home that we elevate in most flood zones and most jurisdictions require venting of that crawl space that we create, which basically says when there's a flood, we're going to park water under this home so that it does not increase the water level in other areas for the next door neighbor or others.
You read my mind, because that I would think would be a neighbor's concern, that, oh, my neighbor is elevated 5-10 feet above me. It's going to run off and flood my home. But do you always elevate and build it where there's displacement underneath? Is it ever a solid structure underneath? A solid slab underneath?
It cannot be by regulation. So you mentioned a neighbor on a hill, right? So they brought in fill and probably compacted it and built that house on top, right? It's unusual to be able to bring fill into a community, at least an urban community or a suburban community. Most are built with the ability to, again, park water under the house. They're suspended elevations, not built on fill.
Do you have any feedback from real estate professionals as to whether or not elevated real property these days has an enhanced property value?
I'll answer that a different way. It restores value. It doesn't necessarily enhance value. So again, back to Meyerland, if you go there today and you buy a 2,500 square foot house, most of them are larger, but you buy a home there, it really doesn't matter if it's an elevated home or a new home that was built elevated. They're all market value homes. Whereas the home that's not been lifted there has severely diminished value, right? So we restore the value of the ones we elevate.
Doing what I do, knowing what I know, because I have all these fabulous guests on the podcast, if I were looking to downsize, because I'm in a home that we, raised our family in and too big for us, maybe looking to downsize, I would be looking for something elevated. I mean, I love the coast. Right now I'm inland in Western Broward County. I don't know if I would be moving to the coast for a variety of reasons, including hurricanes, insurance, and everything else. But I think if I were going to buy again, I'd be looking. Elevation would be a factor today when it wasn't, 30 years
Absolutely.
I bought my home.
The same with me. I would never build a house on a slab close to the ground. I would at least fill, if I could, a foot, maybe two, but I would never build it. Many of our customers don't flood from widespread flooding. They flood from immediate environmental changes. Across the street, they built a large complex of some sort. Now the drainage pattern has changed, and now their home is getting flooded repeatedly. Right.
Yeah, I did an episode, Wayne, with my partner, Katie Berkey, on construction going up next door. And I keep trying to urge listeners, if there is construction going up next door, it's important that you get involved in that process.
Yes.
It's not just about traffic and noise and density. You've hit on one of the other crucial impacts new construction can have on existing construction, and that's drainage and flooding.
Yes.
It really is huge.
It's real. Yes. You should be aware.
Have you had any repeat customers where you raised them a few feet and then they came back and said, we need to do it again?
One customer, it's a gentleman in North Houston that we raised his house 4 feet, and he was, I can get into why we raised it a certain height, right? But he thought 4 feet would cover every contingency. It covered every historical concern. And then literally within the year, it had flooded a couple of inches in his house. And he had already been disrupted 3 years in a row. And we went back and I charged him nothing to do that. I don't like seeing grown men cry, but it was a very emotional day for him and his family.
Well, that's very nice of you. We haven't even talked about cost yet. So what are the costs?
We get calls every day about, I want to elevate my house. What's the price? And that's an impossible question to answer on the phone, right? But I always tell folks, even before I go see them, there are really 3 costs to elevation. And if someone's giving you numbers, make sure that you're able to compare apples and apples, right? And so the costs are the structural cost, the basically the lifting it and putting a foundation under it, as I say, that's gonna hold it in place for at least 100 years. So there's the structural costs. And then you have, I call it functional costs. You disrupted some plumbing, you disrupted some electrical wires. You've got to have steps now to, or at least extend steps to get in the house. These are functional things to make the house functional and practically functional at that level. And then the third category is aesthetic costs to make it beautiful again and to make it look like it was designed to be designed in that way, right? So the first part is probably what you're most interested in, the structural costs. We don't quote by the square foot, but there's a correlation of square feet to square feet over time. And for a home that we're lifting, this is for slab homes, not pier and beam.
Right.
Slab homes, we over time see that our costs range from about $78 a square foot to about $110 a square foot, just to give you a ballpark understanding. So that 2,500 square foot house is going to be 200 to 250,000 or 280,000. It more depends on the aesthetics than anything else.
Sure. And if you live in a homeowners association, you can be assured that the aesthetics are going to count. So you're not just going to leave it like a construction site when you're done.
That is correct. And even if we're not doing the work on those aesthetics, we commonly do not. But they're always an issue. And I don't want to elevate your house unless there's a plan to make it beautiful. I don't want to leave a Frankenstein, right?
So I imagine there have to be grants available to homeowners who want to do this. It probably varies by geography, but can you talk about some of the available grants?
Yes, there are 3 common kinds of grants, and they're all ultimately funded by FEMA. And I got to tell you, Donna, your head is going to hurt after we talk about this. It's a very complex world. Okay. I'm
somewhat familiar with it, Wayne.
Okay. Well, FEMA has, there are communities where there's been repetitive flooding. So FEMA has a national list of what they call SRL properties, severe repetitive loss properties. So if you have one or more of those in your community, you can apply to FEMA for, categorically, it's called a FMA grant, flood mitigation assistance. Right. And what I want to tell you about that is that it's a long process and very few people get it.
Guessing that's by design, Wayne.
Maybe so. FEMA, every year they create a pool of money, just call that $200 million. And all communities can apply for that. I don't know what the win-loss ratio is, but it's a pretty small win percentage that get it, and it depends on the score. They call it the benefit cost ratio, right? So if you tell FEMA you're going to save them a lot of money and it's not going to cost them much, you're probably going to be high at the list of grants. So there are only about 500 houses a year in the country that get that grant.
Wow.
It correlates closely to winning the lottery, literally.
Have any of your customers gotten the grants?
Yes, many. Yeah.
Many. And does FEMA pay you directly or they reimburse the owner?
Well, it's the state that applies for the money. The state is the applicant. The community is the sub-applicant, and the homeowner is the beneficiary. So there are lots of layers of bureaucratic process. So in year 1, FEMA makes the money available and you apply. Year 2, you get notice that your community got this grant, $8.6 million or whatever it is. Year 3, it's finalized and they advertise for contractors to do this work, right? And then year 4, it goes back up through the chain and there's specific contracts and bids and proposals, and that goes back up to FEMA for approval. And then in year 5, some work gets done.
Wow. I'm thinking about who else benefits from being a recipient of these grants. I think the lenders do as well. It's protecting their collateral.
Yes, and we rarely have involvement of the lender. If we don't do it, the lender is going to be involved. There's probably might be a default, a higher percentage of defaults, and so on. Doing the elevation is less of an issue for the lender. You're protecting the collateral. Exactly.
Do we know? Well, I was going to ask also, are there any of your customers who obtain loans to do this elevation work?
Yes, many of them. In fact, after right, immediately after disasters where there's SBA assistance. Many of them get an SBA loan to do this work. Yeah.
I would imagine that. The one thing I haven't asked you so far is whether or not you've ever elevated a multifamily building. Have you ever elevated a multifamily?
Yes. Primarily, I'll categorically call them townhomes, right? These are multifamily in a horizontal sense, not in a vertical sense. They're attached homes.
There was an article a few months back, I think it was a Miami Herald article, and it was talking about a number of relatively new high-rise luxury buildings in Miami-Dade that are sinking, not at a catastrophic rate, but they are. They did a subsidence report. Is that something that elevation could address?
Yes, it is. There'd be a fine line between elevating it and just repairing it, right? But it would involve the same methodology of tunneling and using a unified jacking system to push it back up or push it to level or to elevate it. Yes.
So Wayne, is P3 going to gear up for elevating major high rises?
We can, yes. We do some industrial work that's similar, right? Let's say there was a building at NASA last year that needed to be elevated by 2 feet, and we did that. It was quite a large structure. So it doesn't matter how the building is configured. It's a heavy structure, right? A building of some sort. Doesn't matter that it's a residential or not.
No, it doesn't. I would imagine the technology is the same, which leads me to my next question. Is P3 doing any government contracts?
Well, not directly with the government. We're a lot of our work is funded by the government, but indirectly through through the state and through various cities and counties.
Are you collaborating with any similar companies elsewhere in the world? I imagine you share technology. Maybe you go to different industry events.
We actually we don't. We borrow and lend some equipment at times, but no, we're sort of heads down busy in our own world, and no, we don't get out much.
But I'm picturing when people hear about you, maybe in Europe or wherever, they're experiencing the same thing with rising water.
Yes.
They're reaching out to you to see what you all are doing.
So we do have a plan to expand by partnering with some larger enterprises that understand the vision and understand our capabilities, so we can take this to many other states and other industries. It's very extensible in a couple of directions.
I don't think flooding is going to suddenly go away. From every guest I've had on this show, it seems like not only is flooding here to stay, but it's going to get worse.
Yes, absolutely. So the industry to date has been made up of a lot of small specialist characters, right? And I'll say there's characters that there's a founder and there's always these stories about these characters. These are people that live under houses, tunneling and lifting. You can almost call them hobbyists, right? So there's a lot of hobbyists, and we're trying to turn it into a mainstream industry that can assist counties, states, homeowners nationwide with all sorts of structures and some innovative thinking about what might be possible.
I like your approach to the flooding problem as opposed to building up levees so high. I have a lot of family members in New Orleans. So one of New Orleans' responses to hurricanes and floodings is to build the levees up very high. What can happen, though, is that you can feel like you're literally living in the bottom of a bathtub, looking up over a levee, but by elevating, you don't have that issue.
Exactly. And we have some customers that have looked at every possibility. The pain is so great, right? We have people that looked at every option. They come back to us and say, this is really the only guarantee that I'm not going to flood. It's all sorts of contraptions and mechanisms and other approaches, but this is the one, after exhausting it, this is the one they like best.
So for our listeners, Wayne, who say, well, I think it was a one-off, like lightning's not going to strike me twice. I don't think I'm going to get flooded twice. But if they're in a flood-prone area, what do you say?
Well, I have had the misfortune of seeing repetitive flooding over now a long period of time, right? So I think anything is possible, and a lot of it is probable in due time. Yeah, I was with a family this morning that engaged with us this morning to lift their house, and it affects their lives. Every day, if it's raining or if there's a storm coming, I do not sleep. Those are the words I heard this morning.
I was going to say the mental and emotional toll must be significant.
Yes, and I first spoke to her 7 years ago, and she came back to me this morning and signed up after doing a lot of homework.
I want to get back to what it's like to actually raise the house. Do the occupants need to vacate the home?
I'm glad you asked. So no material possessions need to leave the home during our process. We tell them if you have a Picasso on the wall, you should probably take it, right? Or you have something that's irreplaceable or valuable, take it with you. Otherwise, you just need your toothbrush and plan to be gone it depends on how high the house is going to go. But we get a lot of people back into their homes, living in their homes in less than 1 week.
Less than 1 week.
Yes. We start this excavation process. They still live there. There's guys working under the house, but they still live there. We have to lift the house. We start disrupting the plumbing and electrical and air conditioning. They need to move out, but we can put all that back together. We can lift it and get those things back in place in less than a week, and they can move back in.
Lest anyone think that you're like shooting up the house like a rocket. This is incremental. It's like what, like about an inch a day that it's going up?
No, we lift in most homes that we lift that are going to go up less than 5 feet. It's a 1-day process. We lift them 8 inches, about 8 inches an hour.
8 inches an hour. Okay, but it's still not a rocket.
Safety is paramount in this process, right? So we use a short jack. So we never have the house suspended in midair without many layers of support by more than 8 inches. So it's an 8-inch increment process that recurs about once an hour.
I was going to ask you, Wayne, if there's any downsides to attempting to elevate a structure. And I'm specifically thinking about Florida's 6-month hurricane season here. So, is that, can you elevate during the 6-month season? And what happens if you're in the midst of elevating and the storm comes in?
I don't have a tremendous amount of, there hasn't been enough data over the last 10 years to give you an absolute answer. I could just give you a couple of data points. There's a home there was a video published in the New York Times, as you mentioned earlier, of a home 17 feet up, sitting on temporary cribbing. And that home took a direct hit from Hurricane Harvey in Seguin, Texas, while it was sitting 17 feet up on cribbing with no concrete under it for 17 feet. And it did not waver.
It did not. It was fine.
No, it was fine. Yeah. But I don't want to test that very many times.
No, you prefer not to be doing this in the midst of a hurricane.
But we do this year round. We're in Hurricane Alley here in Texas, right? And we've lifted some homes in Florida, and I could tell you about that. But we just keep going. We can't predict the storms. We just keep going.
Have you had confirmation of insurance mitigation credits for homes that have been elevated?
Yes, that was very predictable until the last, I'll call it 3 years. Almost every home that we elevated to a height that was at FEMA's standard, their base flood elevation or higher, their insurance premium, their flood insurance premiums always dropped to the minimum. We've not seen that in the last 3 years. They have come down, but it seems some arbitrary number, right? We have a lot of customers that have flood insurance premiums north of $10,000 a year, and some north of $20,000 a year. So those come down, but not to that minimum like we used to always see of about $600, right?
I don't know. The market always seems to adjust even to innovation.
Well, FEMA has something called a 2-point flooding 2.0, right? And so they're taking the model has changed, and I don't yet understand the model.
So what's next for P3? I mean, it sounds like you guys are you super busy, Wayne?
We are super busy. Yes, we have. Yes, we are, and it's good. But we have a lot of capacity also, and we have a lot of talent. And when you're doing these things, all the nuances matter, right? So it's not easy to scale up and to scale down. We carry a large crew of people because they're specialists and they know the nuances of the business. You can't just call in people when business flourishes. So we cultivate a team constantly, and it enables me to sleep well, knowing that things are safe and that we're doing things correctly and durably.
That's reassuring because every time, well, listen, I'm down here in South Florida, but every time we have a significant storm or a hurricane, we do have a lot of, out of state people come in,
Yes.
whether brand new people joining them to help out, the level of their experience, the level of their training, their credentials all come into question. So that's reassuring that you have, a long-standing workforce.
It is, and there's really not a substitute for it. And it's very painful to know that there are a lot of less competent operators, right, that are just presenting themselves as somebody they cannot possibly be, right?
Well, I was going to ask you that because as we continue to see these recurring floods and recurring flood damage, are you seeing more people get into your industry, the elevation industry?
It's been slow growth. There are constraints on talent to do this. So what we have done is taken a process. Everything that we do, we are processizing, right, so that it can be scalable and repeatable. We're just looking for the right capital partners to help us. We need an academy of elevation, right? It doesn't have to be a big academy, but there needs to be standards, and there needs to be quality control of all things. There's tremendous demand from this. We get calls from all over the country constantly. Can you elevate my house in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, you name it, California? We've worked in California with City of San Jose, for example.
So I read on your website, 11 states you've done business in?
Yes. Yeah. Most of that experience is my co-founders, right? I don't even consider myself an elevation guy. I don't tunnel under the house. I handle this environment in which we do that tunneling. And it's a very complex environment. And they told me that I was going to have the hard job, and they were absolutely right. The regulatory, environmental, and finance and things.
Wayne, as I'm sitting here talking to you and we take this episode, I live on a golf course and FDOT came in and redid the golf course to displace water and drainage. I'm probably going to need your number on speed dial at some point. Now that I'm thinking about the drainage and my golf course and where that water is probably likely to go. We'll see. We'll see. Any final words for our listeners? Because I have to tell you, I really hope that we've enlightened some people. Like I said, I didn't know that this was a service that was possible. I should have, but I didn't. I imagine some of our listeners, this is also eye-opening for them. So any final words for our listeners? And please let them know where they can find you.
Thank you. Well, of course, they can always find us at p3elevation.com. That's the best place. Since you're concerned about boards, here in Texas, we have very active homeowners associations, and they do care a lot about elevation, primarily that aesthetic component. So the state has gotten involved. You'll have to look up the regulations, but there's certain disarming of homeowners associations where there was a prohibition on elevating their home. You can do more research on that. But we do have some strong HOAs, and a lot of times the HOA is the holdup in getting the work done, right? And it's a fine line between creating another hazard for the family versus upholding the community standard.
Yeah, so to that point, it would be Texas has decided it's in the best interest of the public that, notwithstanding the homeowner architectural restrictions, that people be allowed to safeguard their homes from flood damage. Yes. That makes sense.
That contention is going to persist, obviously, right? And it is very real. There's been HOAs that have held up, and then the home floods again, and that's
a potential lawsuit.
Well, we'll leave that to you.
I'd probably be trying to defend it, but you're right. I mean, listen, in Florida, we haven't seen that yet. But one of the things we saw in Florida was xeriscaping. It was public. The Florida legislature decided that it's good public policy to allow owners to install drought-resistant landscaping, even if it's not that pretty. So homeowners association cannot deny it because, Florida thinks it's a good thing, and it's certainly more economic.
Yes.
So you're right. I think as climate issues continue to mount, we're going to see legislatures step in and allow their citizens to take whatever steps they need to take to safeguard, person and property.
And I believe that this is a solution for the masses, right? And doing it en masse would bring the cost down significantly. And I do think it needs to be considered broadly as a solution.
Wayne, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much for the conversation today. It's been very enjoyable.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.